It is my great pleasure to welcome Patrick McKenzie, also known or better known on the internet as Patio 11, who has uh, achieved many impressive uh, uh, goals, and his writing has inspired many. But I think what really needs coverage and what has been really generative in my own thinking about the psychology of innovation, the psychology of building against inertia, is his experience founding and being the CEO of an effort called VaccinateCA, during which he and a ragtag team of tech friends on Discord saved thousands of lives by making it possible to actually find vaccines where they're actually being, distributing in California, despite a deeply broken distribution system about which we're going to hear more from Patrick today. Such an incredible thing to have done, and also such a harrowing experience from everything that I have read and heard from Patrick on the topic. And so, yeah, I would love to explore the the moral psychology of that experience, of why you chose to step into, the into this mire, and why so many others didn't, and the lessons, the scars, perhaps, that the experience left you with. Because even just reading about it, it brings up a lot of really complicated emotions.
Hmm.
And I can imagine just the difficulty of kind of continuing to love your species and refraining from cynicism.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I
Um,
won't use this as a therapy session, but
yeah,
it comes up in my therapy sessions not infrequently to this day.
as I
Uh,
would hope and expect.
I, I suppose I'll give the mandatory disclaimer off the top because I am a
Please.
responsible professional. Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm speaking only on my own behalf, not on behalf of VaccinateCA, Vaccinate the States, Called the Shots Incorporated, which was the 501(c)(3) nonprofit which ran VaccinateCA and Vaccinate the States, funders, employees, board members, and similar of the organization. And with that out of the way, you know you're going to get some juicy stuff.
That, I mean, it just rolls right off the tongue. I almost wish I had a disclaimer like that just to be able to, articulate it so nicely. Anyway, yeah, so now we can really get into the meat of it. Okay, so Patrick, maybe to start us off, because I don't assume, actually, can we get a show of hands? So, how many of you are familiar with the story of Vaccinate CA? Whether that's you listened to the podcast episode with Workish, or you read the article, works in progress, or okay, that was actually quite a good number of hands. Okay, so we probably don't need to belabor all of the specifics, except as it serves us in our conversation. But be that as it may, I think to give us some color on the highs and the lows of this experience for you, maybe, Patrick, can you kind of give us, like, off the top of your head, what are the maybe one or two things you're proudest of having achieved with this effort? And then maybe one or two of the things that have haunted you the most,
Mhm.
with this effort.
Fish saute sounds great.
And I think someone
Arthur,
needs
if
to
you have
mute
the
here.
opportunity to mute that,
I went
thank you
ahead.
much. Awesome. So highs and lows of the effort. It was not obvious when we started that there would be any great level of success. And I mean, at the very moment when we started, your prior expectation of being able to make a dent in a national problem, given the existence of 10 people on Discord that are banging away wildly about what they understand about the pharmaceutical industry, despite never having worked in it, like odds are low. um, uh, like recalibrated very quickly on that. On day 5, I wrote a memo to the organizers about our strategy and very confidently said this is going to be the national initiative, so buckle up. And that did indeed get borne out. Also made a number of, I went back and love writing memos, went back to read the memos and see like which portions of them aged well versus which portions aged poorly. Didn't hit my fundraising goals, did hit uh, the approximate speed of the ramp, which given that I had almost no prior for that, was uh, patting myself on the back a little bit. Fundamentally, the thing I'm most proud about is a small group of very talented people saw a hole in their society and organized themselves to fix it. And we did successfully achieve some meaningful impact against that in a very short amount of time. And I wish I had a better number for the following, but our internal estimate for life saved is somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000. I have tried to get a better number. The levels of cooperation we get from various people who are partners are bounded. And so one of the important partners is a very large internet-based publisher. You might be familiar with their search engine, but they run other products as well. And they have some rules at this large international publisher. And one is you definitely don't expose query volumes out of the building. It's just nothing but downside. And so I told them, hey, I kind of did you folks a solid. Can you just tell me so I can back solve to the number, like how many people actually got vaccinated as a result of this? What the query volume looks like? And they were like, yeah, no, absolutely not. I said, how a few bars at least? Was it, I don't know, millions? And they're like, well, we wouldn't be talking to you if it wasn't millions. We don't count in lower numbers at this company. And say, okay, tens of millions. And then they got very quiet, and I got no other useful data points out of them. So back solving from that, and with some model of early vaccines matter more because they're going to people who are more medically at risk. We think somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 lives saved as a result of our efforts. Um, and a disclaimer off the top, we are one part of a very large, complex system, that was
Mm,
delivering healthcare
I
to
was did there.
Americans and others in this thing. And the entirety of the U.S. medical establishment, large portions of the government, were involved in the effort, and that is um,
For
not
better and for
instant.
worse.
Yeah. But it's not incidental to our success. We were able to achieve such leverage on our own efforts because the United States has widely distributed healthcare providers, because have to give a shout out to Operation Warp Speed for actually successfully getting the drug to from a first candidate available in something like 48 to 96 hours. Absurd. One of the
Incredible.
best successes in the history of science. To productionized and paperworked. More work on the paper than on the production, but that's neither here nor there. But that process went through in about a year instead of about 3 years, and many people are alive today as a result of that difference. And then there were some like balls that got dropped continuously and not picked up despite all the king's horses and all the king's men saying, well, that ball certainly looks like it's dropped. Good thing it's not my department in charge of it. And we can chat a little bit more about that as time goes on. Um,
Shall. Thank you. Yeah. So as far as then the most haunting.
the most haunting. I got a front row and second row seat to some monstrous crimes committed by the government of the United States against its people. And I'm not saying that to make a partisan observation, and I'm not saying it to exaggerate. We very literally had meetings and wrote down in those meetings, like, cause of action A will save more lives. Cause of action B will flatter the uh, aesthetic and moral sensibilities of the class that makes up the people who are in this meeting in the particular moment we find ourselves in late 2020, early 2021. Ergo, we will go to cause of action B. The number of marginal deaths is not that large. And I realize that sounds like a straw man. There are individual documents you can link to that say that basically verbatim. And then in the non-recorded part of the meetings, or in the emails that are probably FOIA-able, Freedom of Information Act requestable, but that people didn't write to survive scrutiny from a larger audience, the language is worse than that, substantially worse than that. And I think that this should go into the history books along, like things like the Korematsu decision on betrayals of the United States ideals by people who, probably consider themselves moral individuals who are pillars of their community, who had duly constituted legal authority to subject their fellow citizens and residents of the United States to death for reasons which are against our Constitution, laws, and tradition. And We have not largely made that update as a society. And possibly we will, possibly we won't. But this is one of the reasons I continue to keep harping on this versus this was this fun little hackathon thing with nothing but upside that I did back in a few years ago. And to be fair, I think the story is largely an optimistic one, but having been accidentally the person who was charged with the vaccine location information infrastructure, I find myself similarly uh, accidentally charged to be, I suppose, the witness for the dead, and what we did and the consequences our actions had, and the um, moral necessity of reckoning with those actions.
Yeah. I mean, eh, which is part of the reason we're here and part of what I want to honor in delving to the psychological dimensions of VaccinateCA in recognition of the fact that this wasn't just hard for you from the standpoint. I mean, it wasn't hard from the standpoint of actually getting the tech built and actually like creating the thing itself. The ways that it was hard, I think, were largely moral and psychological. And we see that in all of the failures up and down the system, that you witnessed. And I think it also really speaks to just like the monumental achievement, which of course you're going to be modest about, and which you're going to largely, kind of place credit with all the other players involved. But I really want us to both to learn the lessons of everything that went wrong and everything that you witnessed, but also to learn the lessons of what went right and how how you overcame so much of the inertia and so much of so many of the conflicting incentives that clearly prevented more action at a really large scale. So I'd
I
love to, yeah,
If I
go ahead.
if I can just say a few words on the importance of learning lessons.
Mm.
I think one of the reasons the United States government at various levels consistently overrates the difficulty of doing software products is and software products and projects, which are essential to delivering government capacity in the current era we live in and all future eras, is specifically the experience of the healthcare.gov rollout. And I've had the opportunity to talk to Mikey Dickerson, who led the semi-private rescue initiative for healthcare.gov and saw it up close and personal. And I've had an opportunity to talk to a few people that swim around in DC circles. And the received wisdom in DC circles was you can be, the uh, duly constituted authority in the United States. You won your election. You put all your political capital points into your signature policy initiative. And then if those geeks don't have their house in order, that can wreck your presidency. And so, therefore, never get to a position where the success of your policy initiative requires taking responsibility for what the geeks have done. Like outsource that to the people on the approved list of vendors, throw them under the bus when it inevitably fails, and go back to making the speeches and writing the laws like important people do, and not sullying yourself with software.
Yeah. Okay, there's
Goodness,
so
I think
much
we need
I
a
want to,
correction there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
as you mentioned, 0.1% of this was, technical in nature. We did get some questions on how do you manage to keep your website up under heavy load when healthcare.gov crashed royally? And in what I promise will probably be the only technical discussion here, keeping a website up under quote unquote heavy load, where all of that load is people reading from the same data source and just receiving a personalized view on the same data source, is a trivial problem in the age we live in. I have joked a few times you could have run VaccinateCA on a potato, but that is substantially accurate. The smallest server that Amazon will sell you would have been uh, easily sufficient for our needs. And that small server goes for, let's say, $2 a month. We didn't actually run it on a $2 a month server. We had redundancy and similar, but you could, round the technical complexity to uh, uh, things that
yeah,
middle schoolers are easily capable of achieving on middle schooler budgets. And
yeah,
indeed, by the way, there are two middle schoolers in the United States who outperformed their states at vaccine location information infrastructure. One of them here in the state of Illinois, and I forget which state the other one was in. But we were not the only people lapping the government, which is a little worrisome.
yeah. Okay, so this brings up one stack of the many stacks of questions that I'd really love to get into with you. So, tech, by and large, played an uninspiring role in solving this problem, which you've written about and talked about, and again, not at all for lack of capacity or competence or infrastructure availability on the part of tech. You've kind of relayed the sequence of events wherein tech had essentially gotten villainized and had become the scapegoat for everything wrong with America. January 6th had just happened and got really put at the kind of at the um a tech's doorstep, and in that cultural context, the explicit orders that went out from a bunch of the big company CEOs were effectively to stick your head in the sand. Do not get into a newspaper at any cost, if I'm
If I
remembering
can,
this right.
yeah, if I can make it just slight correction there, largely did not come
Please.
straight from the CEOs or executive teams. Mostly
Okay.
came from
The
groups which are,
PRs.
ordinarily speaking, not hugely influential with respect to product roadmaps, which are government relations teams and uh, the PR
Interesting.
teams. And they said, in the unique moment we find ourselves in, tech being criticized by civil society, yeah, that's been Tuesday for many years now, Cambridge Analytica, et cetera. But in the unique moment we find ourselves in, where elected representatives are going to the Wall Street Journal and writing articles about how our wings should be clipped for collaborating in an insurrection against the United States of America, really, really, really not a good time to be in the newspaper for any reason. Like anything that you are doing that has any possibility of there being a backlash, shut it down.
Yeah.
And uh, that was not maximally publicly visible because, obviously memos that are passed within a large corporation are not maximally publicly visible. I think just take it on faith here. I am abundantly aware that those memos happened, and they had
Okay.
downstream consequences which were directly impactful for us,
Yeah.
including things about, the fundability of this from mainstream tech sources.
Yeah.
The And tech was throwing a lot of money into various pandemic-oriented solutionism at the moment. There were some, people who had made their money in tech that were deploying 8 and 9 figures into generally small operations that were doing uh, things that could be characterized as pandemic support. And I won't discuss their internal reasoning for not funding us, but they did indeed not
Well,
fund us. And there is I was cognizant in the moment while asking people for funding on, like, one of the reasons this quote unquote has to be us and can't be you is that um, in a world where this goes badly, you want it to be those plucky do-gooders over there who screwed up royally. And yeah, we funded them, but we didn't have operational control. We didn't know what they were doing with the money. We were just like writing checks like good citizens. We're not at fault. And so we were like an insulation against the possibility of backlash for tech funders. I think this is also true for governments. Governments didn't want to lean on their counterparties in tech because the governments didn't want to say, well, it seems like we have this massive gap in our capability to effectively govern the nation. You folks have competent people. Can you backfill us for some competence? Didn't want to say that. But they were willing to, work with civil society, which in California often is 501(c)(3) nonprofits. And that was face saving for a number of people that were in the conversation, where working directly with the people who control the websites that the information was on would not have been face saving. Uh, and
yeah.
so the and how does this break down in pathways? Well, the CDC Blessed Initiative can't say, mission number one, get this information onto Google as quickly as possible. But they can say, well, we want to distribute it with our civil society partners. And one of those civil society partners can say internally and externally, mission number one, get this onto Google as soon as possible. It is crazy that that isn't the North Star of the federal government initiatives. Um,
Yeah.
but
Thank you. Yeah. So by the way, and just to let you all know in the audience that I have so many questions that I'm going to be selfish about this, but also I am watching for hands. So as and when you'd like to ask a question or jump in, with a reflection, you are more than welcome to do so.
oh,
So I'm giving
can
you
I give
agency. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Patrick.
One aside while I'm at it that I haven't discussed in all that much detail before, the um, a gap in understanding between policy actors and tech actors with regards to some basic facts of the world we all live in was large. And for example, it is the institutional opinion of some people in the United States government that the president has more reach than Google does. That is a thing that they absolutely believe and will say in as many words. They're wrong about this. They're quite wrong about this. Um, there was an actual allocation of resources made by the United States federal government in reliance on that wrong belief. The Digital Services Agency, which got rebranded DOGE, was tapped to backfill the CDC Blessed initiative, which was out of Boston Children's Hospital. Um, and BCH had been doing excellent work on the Vaccine Finder initiative for 10 plus years at this point. They had the institutional gravitas to be tapped by the CDC and said, congratulations, you are now America's solution to the vaccine information problem. And you're going to rebrand you as vaccines.gov. But we know that websites go down when presidents mention them on television. And so we have 20 engineers here who all have, a GS-13 or whatever. They are like officially employees of the national government, and we are going to deploy them on the national government's priorities. And that priority is making sure that the website doesn't crash when President Biden announces it on the airwaves, because obviously that's what happens when this happens. And I'm not.
Wow.
If I had been told this directly, I could not tell you because obviously one cannot stab a partner in the face. But there is a web page on the Digital Services Agency's website which brags about this decision-making process, and so
Amazing.
you can read that and then read between the lines of it. They do acknowledge. Um, we may have slightly overbuilt for the amount of traffic. Well,
Wow.
yeah,
Just endless,
the
bottomless well of these. Wow.
uh, you know,
Very nice.
and there were
Yeah.
many things you could do with 20 engineers times X weeks, and you'll have to ask the DSA what portion of their engineering time got spent
Hmm.
on the scalability issue, but
Indeed.
probably not the same amount that I would have put into it if I was in charge of that initiative. But
Yeah,
be
right.
that as it may, and it is genuinely a good thing that vaccines.gov existed, not because many people used it. I think many more people use Google, but the again, because of this like poisonous dynamic in tech and other spaces where
Right.
we're worried about being seen as insurrectionaries if we do anything that the government isn't doing. The fact of the government doing vaccines.gov like clears the air for Google putting vaccine information on, and it also creates some sort of again, that accountability layer where the uh, some large publishers very much did not want to be in the place where they were endorsing information that they were going to publish on their websites about vaccine availability. They needed someone to be willing to take the hit if that information was wrong or misguided. And we were like, ooh, pick us. Like you can, cite us as the source of this information, and we are just the blessed partner, and you don't have to say the word blessed in print. But the uh, once we were able to represent that, our data is a proper superset of the information which is on vaccines.gov, a lot of those internal conversations got much easier because, they're giving all the government information plus some extra stuff. I once got asked in a meeting what the word proper superset meant, and I said, yes, well, we include all the vaccines.gov results, except the ones which are wrong, plus the data that we have through our own sources. And they're like, which results that the federal government is publishing are wrong. I'm like, would you like a SQL query? Among other
Yeah.
things, there are understandable reasons where the bureaucracies and then comes up with a result which is not useful to people in the actual world. So a thing that the government data set had for a while is like it accurately reported that vaccines were being delivered to certain government facilities and they were being injected to patients there, which true statement about these particular facilities. But if the facility in question is an ultramax prison and you knock on their door and ask for the vaccine, you will not successfully access the vaccine that way. and
Yeah.
so, um, and then there were other things where, it was less true than that. But
Right.
it is going to
So,
have quality issues. What are you going to do?
yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like there's so many different directions. So, kind of sticking with the tech vertical for a moment, because I feel like, we still haven't held them fully accountable on this call.
Hmm.
If you had been, so, you mentioned like you were in this position as the scrappy do-gooders who could take the media hit and, like this is part of kind of the pitch to the big tech co's.
Hmm.
If you had been a big tech co CEO, and I ask this question partly as a founder coach psychologist who sometimes is looking to uh, offer counsel to founders, CEOs who navigate these kinds of kind of moral dilemmas. So, if you are right in the thick of this bizarre cultural climate and you're taking the heat, for every cultural ill, including, the insurrection of late, and there's a pandemic, and you know that, I don't know, you're Amazon or you're Google, and like we could solve this in a
Hmm.
week and we have the resources, but also no doubt that, something at some point would break or go wrong. And now there we are, now we're the pariahs and, and our stock will crash. This is like there are real consequences to worry about. How would you think about that? How would you handle it? Like what would actually have been a wise and responsible reaction by someone in that kind of high visibility
I
role?
think all people in positions of authority and power need to have a risk budget, and spending your risk budget effectively given your values. I think the thing that to do would have done. I assume without specific evidence that if I am the CEO of Apamicu FaceSoft, that I can pick up a phone and be speaking to the White House very, very quickly after picking up that phone, and simply do that and say, "We've identified this thing which the United States very clearly needs, and which your administration very clearly wants to make happen, and yet will not be able to make it happen within the next 2 weeks. Congratulations, it will be fixed in the next 2 weeks, and your decision point is whether you would like to have credit for that, because." If you say the word right now, this will absolutely be President Biden's project, and we will bury in a footnote that it is from your friends at Google. The like, we don't need the credit, we don't need the funding, we just want this done. I think that would have been successful, and I think it would have ticked boxes for a lot of people. Open question on whether either of the two administrations in play would have gone for it. There had been some love lost between. The tech companies and the outgoing administration for a variety of reasons, including a frequent attempt to partner and then get burned by partnering with someone who burns a lot of his partners. And then there was the issue with the incoming administration, slightly different in character. But I do think that to those who as much is given, much is demanded in the ways that I think Joel Spolsky phrased it to me that way, but obviously not a unique thought. Um, you have some responsibility as a captain of industry to bring your gifts to bear for the nation in times of crisis. And this is the thing that we had abundant experience with in the history of the United States of America and did not execute to the limits on in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, I think there's
Motivation.
also a
Yeah.
flip, like if you say hypothetically, wave the magic wand, and it's senior decision makers in government who suddenly, uh, achieve reading the history books and some amount of moral courage. The thing they could have done is call up Apamagu Booksoft and said, we have this authority on the books where, by order of the president, we can give literally anybody in the United States a colonel's uniform in the U.S. Army,
Yeah.
and then say you are in charge of the project under emergency exigencies. What do you need to get it done, sir? So you are going to tell us who is the most senior person at your company that would be good for getting this done. And
Yeah.
if they accept a commission from the president, the swearing in ceremony starts in 30 seconds, and you will present your project plan tomorrow. And
Yeah.
factually, the project
Obviously didn't know what
plan
happened
the project plan that worked was banged out by non-specialists in about 3 hours on Discord. This was not exactly, inventing new science. It is just a logistics thing, and it's a pedestrian logistics thing that we speak about in operations research programs to undergraduates. It should be abundantly within the capability of large globe-spanning organizations. And I also think that was neither here nor there, but that's something that many parts of the government didn't do successfully where they could have, where the you know that won't scale. There's just too many pharmacies. You can't possibly call them all every day. Well, there's 6,000 pharmacies in the state of California, and if one person can call 20 of them a day, then that means you need, 300 people calling pharmacies. Okay. And if you need 300 people, there are a lot more than 300 people who work for the state of California. Importantly, there's this thing called the California National Guard, and you can order them to do all sorts of things in an emergency, like, say, kill people. But a thing you can also order them to do is like put the gun over there, pick up a phone, and call this list of pharmacies and write down what you learn. And there was, I don't know if it was an unwillingness or just like nobody in the room said, "Hey, wait, we have, the like literal and figurative standing army of employees around here, explicitly briefed on like responding to emergencies. Why don't we just act like this is an emergency?" Um, feel somewhat
Yeah.
frustrated. But
Yeah.
instead, we acted like it was a non-emergency. We went through the usual government contracting rigmarole. Um, I'm not relaying this to say it's annoying that California spent so much money on various web applications. But factually speaking, California did more than a dozen contracts at the state and county level to various, Accentures and other consulting organizations to deliver web applications which were supposed to magically solve this information problem. And uh, the people who bought those applications and the people who sold those applications are mutually convinced that they were stunning successes. I am not convinced of that. But that was like the blessed pathway that we could go through, and we went through that pathway regardless of the results that it kept obtaining, which bluntly was failure. And things were late, they did not work, and they did not solve for the need. Um, Also, we asked, as part of the accountability sync for the nation, we asked our consultants to implement things that were illegal and unconstitutional. Like, say, we very literally wrote tens of millions of dollar checks to consultancies to enforce residency restrictions on the delivery of the vaccine, um,
Wow.
which in other contexts is called redlining, when you do it to disguise the racially motivated rationale for it. So yeah, we wrote purchase orders where we would pay, without loss of generality, Accenture $20 million to write a web application that would redline for us harder. Yeah. Uh,
Jesus Christ. Yeah. I mean, this is just, part of the sense I'm getting, and I mean, I've, heard you speak about this podcast and at dinner and in writing, and you still have so much to get off your chest.
yeah.
Like just hearing you talk about it, like you've been carrying all of this with you since January 2021. And I imagine that there were long stretches in there where like you weren't getting to offload it the way that you're getting to do now. Like
Part, partly
how
as a
did you get
considered
through it?
thing, we did get cooperation from people in a large swath of the U.S., including senior staff level people in various governments, including the state of California, the federal government, and similar. And a price of being in the room where it happens is formal and informal guarantees that you won't end the careers of people that are in the room where it happens. And so I tried to be a good soldier for the first year and not blast the initiative while it was still going.
Yeah.
There were things that even in contemporaneously, I'm like, oh, the the policy which is being articulated is very obviously morally wrong and criminal. I think there is an argument for should have put my foot down at the moment and said that and been disinvited from the meetings. The thing I went with at the moment is I'm going to maintain my personal convictions. Won't speak for the organization on this one. So again, I gave the obligatory disclaimer, but the disclaimer is the disclaimer for a reason, right? VaccinateCA does not say that the policy was criminal. That is yours truly's gloss on it.
Yeah. I
And there
mean,
are different people with different perspectives on, say, the prevailing moment that we were in 2021. And I worked with some people from those differing perspectives successfully. I remember, as an example, to strip things of euphemism without naming the individual, I had a job interview with someone, and the I don't remember the instigating how this we got to this part in the conversation, but we discussed the equitable allocation of vaccines, and I said, well, not speaking for the org here, just speaking for myself. I'm in optimizing for maximum number of lives saved. That is my North Star, and we'll support literally anything that gets us there, and oppose anything that does not. And she said something to the effect of, "Yeah, if you maximize for the number of life saved, and it causes that causes the death rate for whites to diverge from the death rate for blacks in California. That doesn't work for me." And I said, noted. Okay. And when I had the debrief of the job interview from the with the other decision makers, I said, I'm going to recuse myself from part of this job interview. But with
Wow.
respect to XYZ that were not related to the final question, yeah, passed. I'm going to just wave my hands of the final question. If you come to the conclusion that we can successfully work with this individual, we'll work with this individual. And that was not the most brusque way that that sentiment got articulated. And that was not the most powerful or institutionally connected person that articulated that sentiment.
Wow.
Um, so,
Yeah. I mean, I
um,
get like there's a listening to your story, like there's a certain kind of angle from which it sounds like, one could call it martyrdom. Like you're choosing because you refuse to just like look away from the reality and from the literal meaning of what people are saying and what they're not saying and reading between the lines and like actually translating it into the like real consequence of lives saved or lost. Like you're now in the line of fire of like just bearing the brunt of just like the pain, the disappointment, the anger, the I imagine rage at times. And yet, I guess when I kind of take a holistic view of the story, it does like somehow martyrdom doesn't fit.
mhm.
Like it feels like you were absolutely the guy to jump in and do this. And like, Matt, my husband who's here, pointed out to me, like, you were super on about COVID and you were interested in the numbers and in the system, right? The complex systems, not an accident that you've got a podcast about that, right? And that in some ways, like, these are the kinds of problems that interest you. And also, I'm sure, like, you didn't know what you were getting into and just how hard and how painful it would be. So I guess I just want to explore, like, the question of, you know, to what extent was this martyrdom? And to what extent was this like a kind of self-congruent project? And how has that shaped your recovery process? Because it really does sound to me like a traumatic experience.
Sure. So, I don't usually talk about the religious angle in public for me, but it was partly religiously motivated. I definitely did some praying on the proper uh, balance of responsibilities of, should I do this for God and country versus should I leave my wife and kids in Japan alone for an unbounded amount of time during a pandemic? And came to the conclusion that, short of blasting an invitation into Mount Sinai, how is God going to make his opinion any clearer on this? Um, which I say to respond to the martyrdom point. There's some element of self-sacrifice, but the martyrdom thing doesn't maybe quite resonate with me so much. The On the one hand, I do think you should like a priori, you might expect the people who have the good ideas to be ones that are quite immersed in things. I do think that it's useful recounting that there were, large pools of professionals who like very immersed in things because it was their day job, and many did not successfully achieve activation energy. Where many of the people who were but for causes of VaccinateCA did not have more than like a hobby interest in this kind of stuff, and in some cases, it felt like a very casual thing to them to get involved in on day one, and then things snowballed from there. And I don't want to speak to individuals as I don't know the entirety of their life story, but Carl Yang, for example, who he was not the first person to read my tweet that VaccinateCA started with me saying, like this is a stupid problem with a very obvious solution. Rather than having every patient and care seeker call every doctor, you should just have one person call all the doctors, publish the results on a website. And I said something to the effect of, if you're I imagined that the right quote unquote right person to those would be some 24-year-old with not much going on in their life, and they might be financially constrained or similar if the project blew up. If you're worried about the $10,000 server bill, send it to me. I will make it go away. And Carl Yang did the math. He's a young professional working in tech, and he's like, wait, no, this is actually amenable to my skill set. Nothing like this looks like something that Dejab, he worked in operations, has not prepared me for. I could just do that. And so he spun up Discord, and then he started texting people he knew and said, uh, what's the clueless quote? Hey, get in, loser. We're solving the pandemic. So the team nucleated around Carl Yang's social network. And I had never spoken to Carl prior to that. We might have been Twitter mutuals or might not have been Twitter mutuals, but I could not have identified his face out of a lineup. Uh, Being in a high agency subset of the network graph, where individuals in that network graph are also in high agency subsets of the network graph, ended up being extremely, extremely useful to us. So I think that is one of my enduring takeaways. And cultivating the right place in the network graph today pays off in spades years from now, when you know might not even know that you are banking like future network capabilities against some need. I certainly did not start blogging in 2006 because it's like, well, someday there will be an acute respiratory pandemic across the world. And on that day, I really want to have operations professionals at financial technology companies swing into action when I do a call to arms. Um, yeah,
Interesting.
life is what happens when you're busy living it.
Hmm. Amen. Life is what happens when you're busy living it. I really like that variant. So, I mean, and this is really interesting because, one of my charters for this conversation is to think about how do how do we learn from crisis about how to live the rest of our lives? This can't just be, and I think patently it's just not a lesson in, what should we do the next time there's a pandemic? I think there are lessons here about how we should, and should want to operate day to day and the kinds of people that we should be trying to become. And again, one thing that actually struck me reading and rereading your article describing this is just the clarity with which you spelled things out. That, so there's clearly, there's the high agency aspect and just like the kind of social network that you would build in the course of living the kind of life you're living. And there's also a way of thinking that maps to that kind of agency where like you just hit us over the head over and over with just like the things that should be obvious but aren't until you say them out loud. Like the spreadsheet says this pharmacist doesn't have the vaccine. The pharmacist does have the vaccine. Therefore, the spreadsheet is wrong. Like there are multiple places throughout the article where you kind of just like really just spell out the facts. And I'm curious, like, does that feel remedial to you in the sense like people are so confused and so much has been obfuscated about the pandemic and about the distribution effort that it needs that level of spelling out? Or like, is it also just a general good practice that you're applying here and that would make it maybe harder to obfuscate and maybe easier, to like force understanding even upon ourselves, even
I,
when incentives are mixed?
I think so. There are multiple interlocking complex systems here. The three I talk about most in the story of VaccinateCA are the government, which there are multiple different levels, et cetera, et cetera. It's a blob. The organization of the pharmacy chains is its own blob. There is a logistics network between the government and the pharmacy chains and other actors that receive the vaccine. And then there's the tech industry, which I talked about mostly because that was my vantage point. Um, in a lot of those places, the not to make a widespread indictment of society in two senses, but we devalue implementation expertise. Like that's something that lowly paid people in the corner are going to deal with. We here in the corridors of power are dealing with the important questions, like not how, but what. And so the corridors of power spent a lot of time on those important questions of who got the vaccine first, and very little time on, if the percentage of vaccines delivered in January in California is 25% of the number that got shipped. what the fuck are we doing? And how do we get that number as close to 100 as possible in, as quickly as possible? Um, Props to Bloomberg here. The state of California did not consider the gap between 25% and 100% to be a problem until Bloomberg made a league tracker about it, where they used a federal data source and calculated, like, here's number shipped, here's number reported the federal government just injected, here's the percentage, and then we will sort the states by their performance against this metric. And then people started bugging senior elected officials in California about, why is California 49th in the nation on this? And then the staff around those senior elected officials came to conclude that 25% was a real pressing problem for California, whereas Californians dying had not been a problem the day before. That is a robust way to phrase that sentence. And there are people in my life, and probably people in the lives of those senior officials, who would say that is an unfair way to say that sentence. Let me underline, like, until Bloomberg made the league tracker, there was not immediate concerted action taken to close that gap. And after Bloomberg made the league tracker, there was immediate concerted action. Um, so,
Yeah, I mean, can I
yeah,
ask, like, sorry, go ahead.
there are just a number of points where, uh, you know, people did things that were incentive compatible given their particular institutional brief on something, where the thing is obviously crazy. And if
Right.
you step back for a moment, you don't need a PhD and 12 years of service in the public health department, et cetera, to say, no, wait, that's crazy.
Crazy.
And in some cases, like, even like, if you were to explain that rationale out loud, it would be almost unspeakable. Um, the not one of the monstrous crimes, but we did get in touch with some uh, people who worked in public health, and they feel they have very low opinions of now. Uh, and prior to going whole hog on this, we tried to say, like, hey, uh, you know, maybe you understand this better than we do. Why isn't there a map already? And I excerpt in the story of VaccinateCA a verbatim email I got from a person who, has duly constituted authority and all the credentials one could ask for to work in California public health. And he said, yeah, map is probably not a priority. And you can read his actual words on describing this, but I will give you the gloss that the people that we are most concerned about can't read maps. And I said, the map could be wrong, and that would be terrible to direct vulnerable people towards doses that don't exist. And I'm like, well, not directing the vulnerable people towards doses is the thing you are doing today. That's bad. And also, that's an argument against the map being bad, but isn't an argument against the map existing. You just try to make it as good as possible and then, like, improve on it over time. And then a thing that I would like to, shake people around the shoulders with for understanding, like, granting your moral intuitions that, like, the protection of the people most vulnerable in society is the most important thing, and there is a digital divide, or however you want to phrase it in the meeting, that prevents them from using Google. Even if that is true, and even if you have the correct moral prioritization, you should understand that giving care to these people frequently involves someone interceding on their behalf, and that person can use Google. When they call up the county health department, that person either doesn't have an interface that they can get an answer, or does, and that interface is Google. And so you should prefer Google having that information as soon as possible. You should prefer having their adult child be able to find that information as soon as possible. You should prefer having, their church or the do-gooders in their neighborhood, or the 501c3 that they go to for blah, 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 having access to this. All of them will be able to bring their social advantages and, ability to do information and to arrange transportation and similar on the behalf of the people who have less advantages. And so now I have the part which sounds like I'm speaking like a crazy person. And so you should not maximize for not distributing correct information to people that have social advantages. That would be a crazy goal.
Oh, Matt's raising his hand in chat. That's good to know. Um, and actually, I was about to open the floor more explicitly anyway, because what I would love to think about, and Matt, if your thing's not about that, you can say it anyway, but I'd love to think about, like, are there places we can think of outside of the pandemic and outside of that, crisis situation, but just like routine everyday contexts, like, let's say, of a founder operating, or of just, anybody doing their job, where that pivot from not stating explicitly the implications of what you've just said, from not, like, naming things with that degree of, like, clarity and precision, to doing so, A doesn't happen by default and B would be really valuable. Like I'm just because it sounds like something that applies everywhere. That's my intuition, and I'd be curious to see if we can kind of flesh that out. But yeah, Matt, what did you want to say?
Um, so I feel like I mean I've heard you tell this story a number of times, and my sense is that there are at least three kind of big t things that strike me like big themes. One is many people in positions of power had moral intuitions that were incorrect. Like so you could just be like, I disagree with you. You're wrong. Like here's what I think the moral calculus should be, or here's what I think the moral principle should be. But like people are disagreeing with you. Another is cowardice or lack of courage. It's just like there are people who no, there are plenty of people who are like, this is crazy, or who maybe they didn't even say to themselves that this is crazy, but they had this sense of like, I wouldn't be allowed to say this out loud. Like you kind of get into issues of like weakness of will and ataraxia and cowardice, just like, like, are you standing up for your principles? And then the third is um, who wanted to win? Like you could call it high agency. Just
Mhm.
like whose job was this? Who was like thinking out a little bit outside of the box, not even that far outside of the box, but just like this is an operational problem and we can win and like how can we apply ourselves to this and like if the normal departments aren't equipped to do this, what other resources do we have? I don't like I feel like the first thing I think I understand, like people who I morally disagree with, like that is like we're in a culture war. I don't necessarily I think I'm less clear on the other two and how they interplay with the first one and just like I mean this kind of gets to Gina's questions of just like what are we supposed to do with this? Like it doesn't feel that useful to say like be brave, like what's the like like notice when you are unwilling to say something out loud because it sounds crazy and maybe pursue that line of thought or I don't know. There's
If
no question. Is that not true? Just like I'm inviting you to riff on that, but I'm trying to kind of learn something from this in a way that's not just like fuck all these people, or
yeah.
like man up, or
So
like
Yes, same.
there's something interesting here.
So
Yeah.
the consistent theme across various systems on who actually, so answering your number three was
Yeah.
first, um, the objectives of like very senior decision makers were extremely, extremely press driven, which is a useful fact to file away about society. Um, Zvi Moskovitz, who's slightly more cynical than I am, said that his heuristic, and it never steered him wrong, was that the senior political leaders had a 2 week look forward window, and they were maximizing for the PR hits of their operations within 2 weeks, and had zero care about consequences that were farther out from 2 weeks because they were just continuously in a series of fires for their entire time. Um, yeah, that toy model generates testable predictions, which come very close to accurate, and that's scary. Maybe we shouldn't pick leaders like that. Who actually did want to win? In a bunch of different systems, the answer was frequently uh, like people who did not have formal authority were generally speaking, bright go-getters, had been relied upon in their institutions for that fact, and who were not senior decision makers, but had the ear of senior decision makers, and often became the local COVID czar by looking around the room, seeing we don't have a COVID czar. I should be the COVID czar. And I've heard that story from inside pharmacy chains. I've heard it from large California medical systems. I've heard it from the California governor's office. VaccinateCA sounds a little bit like that if you squint at it, et cetera, et cetera. It it is singular that we didn't have a national COVID czar. Like that seems to be something that is within our capability. And pointing at one individual and saying like, uh, forget your day job. You don't have a day job anymore. The only thing that you will be judged a success or failure on is like the actual impact of your actions and the organization you control on America's experience with the COVID epidemic. Uh, didn't have that. Did have people who were in charge of the equity strategy. We got a lot of papers about equity. Um, uh, on your number two, the failure of courage. The most depressing, I think it's a 90 minutes long meeting that you can attend of your life, and there's a public recording of this, is the uh, shoot, I should have come with the citation, and I will give you the indicative
How dare
citation.
you not have the citation on hand?
Uh,
Just kidding.
it's the advisory council to the FDA on the COVID vaccine prioritization strategy, and they're debating. Uh, so this is for establishing phase one versus phase two versus phase three, which the rest of the nation basically like copied from the FDA/CDC guidelines and then made local variations on. So um, there was prior art on this due to previous respiratory pandemics, and it was very obvious to everyone that the absolute first people to get the vaccines are going to be the people delivering the vaccines. Makes sense, fine. Now we have the actual biology of the COVID pandemic to contend with, and it is much more lethal and much more consequential for people who are older versus people who are younger. And the finger to the wind here, which was well understood by this time in the pandemic, is that your risk of death or serious consequences goes up by about 10x per decade of age. And so, uh, phase 1B, should it be people who are 65 years old, of which there are X number in the United States, and where we predict our model says why deaths if we give it to them first, or should it be essential workers who are disproportionately much younger than 65, who are much less at risk of the disease being severe should they get it, who are essential to the economy, where 65-year-olds are largely sidelined in the economy due to the nature of retirements and similar. And they made this very explicit, like with a plus 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 in the PowerPoint on it. And 65-year-olds are disproportionately white. Essential workers are disproportionately non-white. And so, how does the ethical calculus come out for this? So the PowerPoint on this is absolutely freaking jaw-dropping because it will, like, in the most, I hate to use the word banality of evil because that's associated with World War II. But like when you have a PowerPoint deck, which is like explicitly plus 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 for my option because blah blah blah. Only two pluses for saving lives because it will kill 6% more people or 2% more people. I think is the number they came up with. And therefore, we are morally obligated to choose plus 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 over plus plus. The PowerPoint deck is like enraging if you only saw the deck. But if you see the actual presentation, there are multiple credentialed professionals, medical ethicists, senior people in epidemiology control, et cetera, who come to the microphone and say, "Thank you for the opportunity to talk. I just want to echo what everyone else has said." And then they sing from the 2021 hymnal on the equity question. And there was nobody in an hour and a half who was willing to say, "So I've heard all your arguments. And I just want to point to page 43, where we're suggesting like 2% extra deaths. And I want to say, like, to do the math here and say that's 20,000 people. Have we decided which 20,000 people we are okay with sacrificing? Is it going to be someone from our families or someone from someone else's families? Can we just like articulate that explicitly right here?" And no one had the relatively small amount of moral courage to step up in a meeting and look like they were not on the same page as their colleagues and professional peers and similar. And that repeated all over the place. I think we've memory holded in some respects, and we've with respect to this issue in particular, but with regards to a lot of the societal issues we're going through in 2020, 21, there were a lot of people who, to their peers privately said, "Oh man, when that person said we don't need another white guy in this department during the recruiting meeting, yeah, that was kind of wild. Usually you don't say that." Anyhow,
Yeah. So
and so a failure of moral courage up and down the stack, and a way in which
yeah,
consensus-driven decision making became lockstep in a lot of places, and I think if one wanted to make an argument that like moral manias and consensus-driven decision making happen more aggressively these days due to the effect of social media and echo chambers and the increasing uh, sortition of the American polity into two camps that speak to each other less than previously. I think that's an interesting argument to make. Maybe
I
someone else will make it at some depth. And in terms of like we're a democracy, political accountability, et cetera, et cetera, there would probably be more political accountability if, you know, like descriptively speaking, there is like we have two colored blobs in the United States, and one of those colored blobs calls the shots in California, and another colored blob opposes them on most things. And colored blob B doesn't really love vaccines at the moment. And so, despite like this being maximally enraging to them along most axes, they have not been willing to make political hay of that yet.
Yeah.
That might change. Their little birdie tells me that there are some people in colored blob A who are aware that particularly damaging emails exists, which tied to people that have national political aspirations, and they're worried about that being an attack ad. And like, oh, I could write that attack ad. It would be a pretty bad one. But I'm not primarily involved in partisan politics. Sorry, returning flow of the conversation to you.
So, Patrick, I mean, I guess part of what strikes me to kind of hear you recount these stories is like I feel like there's still this sense of bewilderment. Like you point out, like this is going to be shocking, and I'm going to tell you it's true, and you can see that it's true, but like you're still shocked by it. It's like, but like it's still hard to make sense of. It's still hard to even like fathom. Like, how could people sit in this meeting and not turn to page, and not surface the seemingly obvious fact? And I guess, I
And
write a lot about if I really want to kind of get this out there, which is that, I write about death being the default, like that by default, we are passive and incompetent, and by default, everything is broken and dysfunctional. And so, like, what should be surprising to us is that anything ever works. And like when I read the story, what's surprising to me is you. Like what's surprising is like this scrappy band of tech friends actually did something about it and actually stepped up and actually, named the facts and had the courage. And I wonder like how we can kind of flip that narrative, or if there is a flipping to be done in the narrative in terms of like what we have to understand here is, you mentioned the banality of evil. Like it's not irrelevant that, yeah, that referred to Nazi Germany. Like Nazi Germany happened before social media. It happened outside of this very particular, political bubble.
mhm,
And we can point throughout history to many, many instances of the kind of groupthink that then can, balloon and fester into really horrific, large scale evils. Like,
mhm,
yeah, like that's ordinary. That's the everyday.
mhm.
I mean,
And
yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say at least one point that even if we adopt the moral frame of people that I largely reject on, deaths are much worse if they happen to Group A versus Group B. Um, Even within that moral frame, the uh, actual actions taken were better at assuaging like the moral aesthetics of people that were in this establishment, and worse on actually accomplishing the outcomes that they wanted, which you
Oh
can
yeah.
read at arbitrary depth in the story of VaccinateCA and other places. But and this is a fact that should have been available to the people that were making these decisions. I consider myself a relatively well-read individual, and so I've read things about voting rights in the United States. And one of the things that you learn if you read about voting rights in the United States is a facially neutral thing, which asks people to bring an ID to the voting booth, is not actually neutral because some people are much more likely to have IDs with their name and address on it than other people are. And I assume like this is just something that you know ambiently if you are in the American political class. And
And
so
would
in
bring to bear, like, and it would occur to you in this connection,
Right.
is what
And
we have to assume, right?
so the people who were suggesting residency restrictions to protect the doses for the demographics they most cared about should have been able to anticipate that requiring people to prove residency to a bureaucratic process is not, in fact, something that will redound to the favor of Black Americans when you attempt to do it at scale. But it sounded great in the meeting, and so they went with it.
Right.
Uh,
And so there's something they didn't do that like is so second nature to you to do that it's like bewildering that they wouldn't, which is like actively make those connections,
yeah,
right? And
like,
actively ask like, okay, but is there anything else
you
in a
know,
different context that's like
I'm
this that might lead me to question this kind of thing?
I'm not a hyper-partisan individual to the extent I have a politics. I'm a bog standard Republican. I do not have a law degree. I have read these documents before.
Right.
All of
So
you folks who
how
do
could they
have,
not? Yeah.
law degrees and have uh, extensive records of scholarship on remediating, like discrimination in complex social systems in the United States. How? How? Sorry.
Right. Again, bewilderment,
Bewildering.
right? Genuine bewilderment. And I
And
guess like what I want to reflect on is like, how did you become the person for whom it's completely unthinkable that somebody wouldn't think of that and bring it to bear in a context where they're making this kind of decision? Because to me, it's not bewildering in all honesty. I've seen, like to me, like, yeah, no, knowing nothing else but that it's 10 average people in a room. Yeah, no, I wouldn't expect them to think of that. And I wouldn't expect them to actually follow the logic through to its inevitable conclusion if you actually do the cognitive work of putting it all together. Because I don't think most people do that most of the time.
yeah, I have a
Next
I
to
don't know.
Adam.
I would not expect it from 10 random people drawn off the street, but I had higher expectations for our political elites. And
Okay, maybe that's
then,
part one of the assumptions that for
yeah,
us to check.
the uh, had to revisit how, like, what is the actual caliber of decision making, the actual caliber of education and similar in the corridors of power in the United States. Is it different than where I think it is? It might be. And the you know you you have some impression that you're left with from reading the history books and watching movies and similar of like uh, you know West Wing, for example,
Mm,
that like propaganda for the competence of the United States government at the highest reaches, but like
yeah.
it's very one would imagine effective propaganda, and a lot of people do actually get into government because they see like the people who are
Mm.
on West Wing and they're like, I didn't grow up wanting to be deputy undersecretary of whatever, but if I get to work
Yeah.
with
But
people
if I
like
can
this
be
all
like
day,
this guy,
uh,
yeah,
like that
totally.
sounds great. And people will say absolutely unironically, yes, I'm in politics because West Wing existed.
Wow.
Then you like read the emails sent by people who
You're
are in
sorely disappointed. Yeah.
these places that it's like, ooh, West Wing dramatization of a true story. Uh,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah.
Do, do, do,
At
better
some point.
calibration on this kind of stuff. Uh, I regret that it's not possible to like simply, uh, read like the data flow within a large tech company and see how it differs from the data flow within a large
Mm,
government organization. I contend that there are differences in
hmm.
those two, and there's a tech emails Twitter account which shows uh, typically emails that come to light from senior tech decision makers because they were brought up in a lawsuit. And sometimes, like those senior tech decision makers are making banal, venal, or stupidly advised decisions. One of my favorites is when the CEO of Google at the time writes in an email, please inform PayPal verbally of the wage fixing conspiracy because I don't want to create a paper trail about it. He wrote that in an email. Um,
Wait,
yeah,
what?
yeah,
In
just
an email, he wrote that okay, that's
yeah,
wow.
Eric Schmidt,
So,
and Eric Schmidt, not
wow.
a stupid individual,
No, no, none of us would
but
own that.
I think broadly, like the depth that you get in those things is better than the depth of like similar
Yeah,
documents that come to public eye regarding the government. Um,
yeah. But what a great, like, even he's not exempt from just like completely missing the like hilarity of the contradiction of his own words in the moment that he's typing that email.
yeah,
And if Eric Schmidt can commit that level of it, I mean, a cognitive error, we can argue also about the kind of moral dimensions of it, but like, then, yeah, what do we expect from people who are in government politics and, may or may not have been inspired by West Wing? And even if they were initially, who knows how far they've drifted as they've encountered very different, kinds of cultural norms and dynamics and incentives structures. But I
I
wanted
see that.
to, yeah, we have two people with different formatted hands. Sorry, go, is that what you were gonna?
Yes, I was just going to
Perfect. Okay, so Adam, do you want to
Yeah,
ask your
sure.
question?
Thanks, Gina.
Of
Yeah, I'm
course.
not sure if
Hi,
it's a comment question or combination, but
go for it.
first, kudos to you for all you did in that circumstance. And that's a fascinating first step and not to be understated. I'm not surprised at the ineptitude of the government. But anyway, what strikes me about this isn't just the vaccine context or the morality, although that is interesting, but the broader agency, like in the face of that paralysis that shows up in not just the federal government, but large corporations or anytime that you feel constrained against large numbers of people that find that safety in numbers, even when that avoidance of that risk has massively negative consequences, especially in your context. I'm just curious. This is where I'm not sure if this is a question or comment, but drawing from that lesson about taking that action in that first step, and even when faced with all that paralysis and all the negativity you commented on at the outset, I'm just that's the part I find I think most fascinating and where it can apply outside of the context of the federal government or vaccine distribution.
I think there are a couple of sort of like cultural things that are just in the water we swim in the tech industry and adjacent spaces, which I hope we can export to the rest of society in the same fashion that, like, politics exports the West Wing to the rest of us. Um,
Mm,
the quote unquote founder mode. You roll up your sleeves and do whatever it is that needs doing, and there's kind of a bit of a cult around that. It could go less for the cult than some people do, but founder mode is a real thing in the world and useful. The more broad-based thing that exists in tech spaces is DRI, directly responsible individual, where you understand is just a brute fact of nature, like the nature of large systems. If there's not someone who is individually accountable for a result in the organization, the default is failure. Therefore, for any result that you actually want to see, like make sure someone signs up for that explicitly, and that everyone knows that it is this person who is explicitly signed up for it. And that is the thing that we run screaming from in some other contexts in society, and perhaps we should run screaming from it less.
mm,
I think one of the reasons is like there's just a great aversion to accountability in government systems. Even people who are quite sympathetic to government systems have come into my podcast and discussed privately with me and said, as a mid-level like government employee, the main thing you are attempting to do is avoid getting a call from a legislator or legislator's aide that complains about XYZ. And so you are extremely aware of the fact of that call when it happens. You are aware of the institutional memory of things that have caused that call in the past, and you optimize for avoiding that and optimize for paper trailing everything you do so that it looks reasonable in the event that you are questioned by higher authority. And simply failing will not cause you to get the call because the failure will be diffuse among many individuals because people largely expect the government to fail now, et cetera, et cetera. And I like to keep two thoughts in my head at the same time. Like, we are a rich and powerful nation that can accomplish meaningful things in the world, and also we have this learned helplessness where we expect to fail on things that we don't want to fail on. Like those are tough things to keep in synthesis, but I think both parts of it are useful to know.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Ellen. Hi,
Hi.
question.
Well, I just wanted to offer my perspective a little bit because I live in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. So it's a little bit odd for me to
Mm,
be listening to your story because the hole that you were trying to fix in your government in California, it did not exist here. Our actual government was not inept in the way that you're describing. I
mm,
went to my local Region of Waterloo public health website during the early days of the pandemic, and there was a list there of all the places you could go and get a vaccine, the pharmacies, and they even had public health run sites where you could go. We had a local public health person like giving briefings to the press once a week saying this is the state of the pandemic in our community. These are the outbreaks in the long-term care facilities. We had at the federal level, we had a science advisor to the government who's going on television and talking about the pandemic every week. Her name was Teresa Tam. And um, I mean, a lot of those things have gone away now, even though the pandemic has not really gone away. And I think at also my multiple levels of government did fail to really communicate the airborne nature of the pandemic and how like protecting yourself from transmitting things through the air is a good idea, or even like, okay, we're not going to require you to wear masks anymore. We're canceling our mask mandate, but it's still a good idea and you should do it or something. Like, I feel like there are multiple levels of failure for our government on sort of the airborne side of things, but on the vaccination side of things, where you're talking about, um, it was done. Like there would be nothing for your Discord group to step in to do there. And
Hmm.
I imagine where your family is in Japan, the government was similarly like not so inept. And I kind of wonder like what's the difference between those systems? Like I don't imagine that I don't know, the moral courage of someone average person in California is somehow inferior to the average
Of
moral
course, clear.
courage of someone in Japan or Canada or something, but maybe something about the way that we set up the systems in our government. Maybe it's cultural differences. I mean, Canada shares a language and to some extent some geographical features with the United States, but there are some cultural differences. We do have a
Mhm.
universal healthcare system. We do have some local public health
The
units.
the I wish that we spent more calories as a society on things like comparative political science. And obviously, there are journals of that, but the journals have run a lot of articles that are things on things other than exactly this question. And I think, for like 2 years running, it should be just no, here's what Japan did, here's what Canada did, here's what margins we succeeded at, here's which ones we didn't, and compare notes for next time. Um, Hopefully not pandemic shape next time, but whatever the next societal issue down the pike is. Um, I'm a bit constrained due to having an immigration status. And what I can say with regards to the Japanese government, I will neutrally observe that from the point where they decide to get really serious about the vaccination campaign to the point where they had successfully injected 50% of the population of Japan was 90 days, count them. And so, like,
Wow.
that is a nation that has the, in case of emergency, break glass uh, reserve state capacity and knows how to use it. And I think
Hmm.
we also have much more state capacity in the United States than we routinely tap, but did not successfully organize ourselves towards it. You mentioned that the industrial organization of healthcare is very different in the two nations, Canada and the United States. That is extremely important. The There are good things and bad things you could say about American healthcare. That like it was a necessary for VaccinateCA to be successful at filling this hole. That there are pharmacies so widely distributed across the United States, and that as kind of a quirk of pharmacy operations, there is a high-paid, responsible individual who sits next to a phone all day and has full oracular knowledge of their vaccine supply. And Uh, that doesn't exist everywhere. We were asked by funders whether we could extend VaccinateCA to a third nation, and I'm going to be elliptical on what that third nation was to protect confidences. But it's another imperfectly democratic nation, we'll say. Large, imperfectly democratic nation. And the notion of saving the lives of a lot of people there appeals to me for the same reason that saving a lot of lives for people everywhere appeals to me. And there were a couple of sort of differences on the ground, less about the culture. There's a great book by what's the name? William Reed, Making Common Sense of Japan, and he has this rant slash explanation about how people reach for the word culture when they are looking for differences in systems but don't have words to describe the differences and the built reality and incentives, et cetera. He said culture basically ends up being the error term. Uh, that the argument changed how I viewed the question substantially. But so in this third nation, they had two problems. One, the industrial organization of healthcare, a bit different than the United States, and so we couldn't rely on their factually are widely deployed for profit-seeking pharmacies everywhere. And as a result of the industrial organization, those pharmacies they will both have the vaccine and be able to tell you they have the vaccine. Number two was that I'm not that interested in politics, but politics is sometimes interested in the rest of us. And in this particular nation, embarrassing the government is something that, imperfectly democratic nation, embarrassing the government is something that can get you beaten by people with badges. And the a strength of the United States of America is that no matter how badly you embarrass the governor, it is extremely unlikely that you will get beaten by people with badges, that you will get your tax return audited, et cetera, et cetera. This is actually um, maybe you know a true thing that we struggled with for varying values. We in the early days of VaccinateCA was. Uh, what if the government asks us to not do this? And I told my colleagues, I think it is extremely unlikely that the government will ask us to not do this. That strikes me as outside of the norms for the United States of America. Well, what if, in we have legal liability for interfering in the formal effort. And I said, well, I don't think we're interfering in the formal effort. I would be worried if we were, actually making it harder at the margin for people to get the vaccine than easier at the margin. But we're essentially a specialized newspaper publishing true facts about the vaccine, the First Amendment and jurisprudence and Constitution and received traditions of the United States of America make newspapers virtually invaluable. I'm extremely not worried. Also, hypothetically, if someone tried to do that, the people who are currently on the sidelines about supporting this would be off the sidelines very quickly because like that activates sacred values in the way that merely saving the lives of people at risk of dying through illness does not quite activate the sacred values quite so hard in the relevant places. Unfortunate commentary on the system that is the United States, but is what it is. Agreed that there were very different experiences of this in various countries worldwide. We certainly would not have been able to copy paste the model to every place, or have needed to copy paste the model to every place.
Um, Patrick, since you mentioned Japan, one
Mhm.
thing that I was really curious about, and since I'm still really interested in this project of trying to understand, like, not only at the cultural but also at the individual level, like, how do you become a Patrick rather than you name any of the cowardly or otherwise bad actors in this whole debacle. I've heard you talk about your experience working at a corporation in Japan, which, as I recall, was also kind of harrowing in some of its own ways. And so I'm really curious, like, do you see that experience in any way having shaped how you approached or experienced VaccinateCA? Like, did it sensitize you to certain forms of like inertia or low agency, or did it give you a thicker skin or maybe thinner skin when it came to dealing with this kind of irrationality? Like, are they at all connected for you?
So I describe myself as a recovering Japanese salaryman, and I'm more
That's right.
recovered on some days and less recovered on other days. Um, there are there is a received wisdom about being a Japanese salaryman in the way that there's a received wisdom about being a federal employee, in the way that there's a received wisdom of being a tech worker. And a lot of that received wisdom of being a salaryman is around the foibles and folkways of working in large organizations. And I think like it is actually a useful map to the territory of other places. So there is a word in Japanese, sontaku, which I don't know if there's a great translation for it in English because I don't necessarily know that we have the concept of it. Um, the best I can come up with is anticipatory compliance, where uh, the I will lie to mentioning the issue that brought Sontaku most to the public fore recently in Japan because it is heavily politicized there, and I would like to keep my immigration status. But like if you are a low-level person in a salaryman staffed organization, and you understand that the boss's boss's boss will want X, then you are supposed to start Xing on behalf of the boss, on behalf of the boss's boss, on behalf of the boss's boss's boss, before you are explicitly directed to X. And thus, this will cause sort of bottoms-up adoption of policies where there is no paper trail, there was no order given, but yet was that directed by the boss's boss's boss? Yes and no. And everybody in the the organization understands that Sontaku is a thing and that you can do things that the military has a phrase for this in the United States, commander's intent. By clear indication of commander's intent, you can give someone with an order without giving them an order. And that is a superior way to give an order than giving them an order in certain cases, given certain goals. So salarymen have this thing like rattling around in their heads on, oh, yeah, Sontaku. Yeah, that it. A, fact in the world. B, I'm seeing Sontaku in front of me, and the people who are Sontakuing each other don't seem to notice they're doing it. I think that anticipatory compliance was all over the place in the pandemic situation in the United States, and this causes people to misdiagnose things. So, you know, sometimes when I make allegations about things that happen, people say that absolutely didn't happen. I'm like, well, written record absolutely did happen, but in some cases, it's like one, written record absolutely do happen. Two, I think you have a like a borked model of the world if you don't understand that the tone set from the top will cause underlings to create policies even without those policies being explicitly mandated or written down. And again, written record is the written record. I try to stay within the four walls of it, but like I don't know, we do a great song and dance in the United States on learn things from other cultures that will make you a more well-rounded human and better at everything. And maybe like picking up the word sontaku or finding an English equivalent for it and socializing the knowledge of this fact of large human organizations and human psychology is a useful thing to do.
And do you see it as useful both? I mean, like obviously at the like leadership, system building level, like be wary of the fact that you are giving orders without even
Oh,
giving them and
goodness.
think about what
Yes,
they are.
yes.
And or also at the individual level. Yeah.
I think it is extremely important for people, regardless of where they are. And this is the thing that I occasionally have to remind senior leaders, not all of them are 100% reflective on the following statement. Anything that you are seen as giving time and attention to will be up prioritized by the organization. And therefore, you should be very careful what you are seen as giving time and attention to.
Yep.
And many of them have, a continuous experience of their own life where 6 years ago, they were a geek in a dorm room with six of their closest friends. They had just closed a seed round of funding, and then their life feels the same for the next 6 years. It's just like the numbers get bigger, the number of friends I have. We're not in a dorm room anymore, but I'm still the guy who like followed his intellectual interests wherever they led me 6 years ago.
Yep.
And at some point, as a leader, you have to say, okay, life has changed for me. I now have authority and responsibility, and one of my responsibilities is, without me wanting it to, anything I'm seen to do or seen to pay attention to becomes more important for thousands of people, and I need to be extremely aware of that lensing effect. And I think individuals should be aware of it too. Be aware of like the distinction between am I following orders versus am I following like anticipating on the orders. If I'm anticipating the orders, am I right? An early indication that maybe you shouldn't be doing the thing you are doing is if the thing you are doing cannot be described in the clear light of day.
Everyone write that one down. Clear indication you shouldn't be doing what you're doing is if what you're doing can't be described, or is it the reasons for what you're doing can't be described in the clear light of day, or
both of them. Both of those are like signals that like maybe something is going on here.
Or it can't be described just like directly and simply, and has to be described in some weird obfuscatory way.
And this is like people who are versed in the art of corporate politicking and similar, like familiar with that things like CYA memos, cover your hindquarters memos, for if you are in a position where you are forced to do something which is, or doing something which is illegal, immoral, like document your concerns in writing so that you have a paper shield should there ever be consequences to it. And like, okay, bracketing that for a moment. If you ever find yourself writing a CYA memo on a thing you are choosing of your own volition to do, maybe don't do that. Matt has a comment. I suspect The normalization of that of silence in the face of artificially high social costs for moral disagreement or something like this is at a core of much of this. Yes, I generally think this is true. Um,
It's like once you
you
get
know,
used to that, it doesn't feel like cowardice, I think. Like I think it
yeah,
feels like they're
we
like I'm just trying to live my life. There are crazy people out there. Like sometimes I just need to shut up, and then that bleeds into that's my guess. Like if you're I'm just trying to project the psychology of it. But
I think, and another pip pip for reading history and applying things from cultures that we didn't necessarily grow up in. Histories of the Cultural Revolution are largely not written by people who considered themselves evil or failed to kiss their children on the cheek before bedtime. Um,
Right.
the like moral manias aren't a unique thing that we are discovering the human condition in the last couple of years. And I do genuinely think that we had a couple years of it in elite institutions in the United States, punctuated by a very, very wild, call it 18 to 24 months. Uh, and Some people have memory hold the fact of those 18 to 24 months for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's some amount of guilt or transference. Maybe it's some amount of like, you know, that was 6 years ago. Maybe it's some amount of my team doesn't look great in that one, hey, I just did what I had to do. I put my head down. My career went on, and now like talking about the thing that I had to do is just uh, not incentive compatible. Yeah, being aware of the fact that we the sociological substrate that caused us to go through 2 very rough years has not substantially changed. And there are any number of people who will say things like, well, an election happened, and thus, the sociological substrate of the United States will never be the same ever again. Press X to doubt. Um, and so, maybe like pre-commit to if there is another mania passing through the building, like what can we do to throw the brakes a little bit or I don't know. Very plausibly, there is somebody with sharply different view than myself who's like, nope, actually, I think throwing the brakes on the thing that you described as a moral mania would have been a ethically ruinous act. Okay, bracketing that disagreement for the moment, like make pre-commitments with respect to, where are the lines for the organization? Because I don't think there are many people of good intent who would sign up for everything that was done in 2020 and 2021.
Hmm.
Um, the Okay, so does I notice the time is about 90 minutes into our
Yes.
session, and
Yes.
I don't have a planned close here. For people who want to read more, there is the story of VaccinateCA or previous interviews I've done on this, including with Dwarkesh Patel and on my own podcast. I will likely write more about it in the future. And if folks
Hope
have
so.
any questions that they don't want to ask in the chat for whatever reason, my email address is patrick@kalzumeus, KALZUMEUS.com. Feel free to send me an email. I like talking about this. Well, like
Clearly
is a
so.
strong word. I feel
Feel
professionally and
compelled
morally committed
and
to continuing to tell this story for a while.
yeah. And we so appreciate you for it. And I think are all the better off for it. Thank you so, so much, Patrick. I have a million more questions, but I will save them for the next opportunity that I
Well,
managed to
thanks very
secure.
much for taking the time, everyone. And thanks very much, Gina, for making this happen.
bye.
Thank you all.